Geopolitics with David.
When Europe flies troops to Greenland, the headline isn't the airplane, it's the message. Because troop movements like this, in a place that most people can't even point to on a map, are rarely about war tomorrow. They're about certainty today. They're about removing ambiguity in a political environment that suddenly feels negotiable. And here's the open loop. The most important part of this story isn't how many boots landed on the ice. It's what Europe is trying to insure against, without saying it out loud. I'm Professor David O'Brien. I study how geopolitical shocks flow downhill into household costs. Energy, shipping, borrowing, insurance, taxes, and the quiet price of uncertainty. This is educational content, not financial advice. Do your own research and consider professional guidance. By the end, you will understand three things: what actually happened, the real mechanism behind it, and what to watch next. Because this is not a one-day drama. It's a signal in a longer game. Here's the map, fast, in 5 beats. First, the trigger. What we know about these flights and what we do not know. Second, the mechanism. Why moving small numbers of troops can matter more than moving large numbers, because it's about message, legitimacy, and insurance. Third, the pattern. 3 historical moments where troop presence wasn't about fighting immediately, it was about shaping decisions and preventing the worst day. Fourth, the current stage, where we are right now, inside NATO, inside Europe, and inside Washington. And fifth, the watch list, the specific indicators that tell you if this stays a symbolic rotation or becomes a structural shift in Arctic posture. Now, what do we actually know, and what do we not know? We know European troops are arriving in Greenland on Denmark's initiative, with Allied participation framed as rotation, reconnaissance, training, and reinforcement. Not an invasion force, not a permanent occupation, and not a declaration of war. We know Denmark's defense leadership has been publicly talking about a more durable presence on the island, with partner nations contributing on a rotational basis, and with missions that include things like reconnaissance, protecting critical infrastructure, and strengthening the Arctic security posture. We also know the numbers being discussed in public reporting are small, teams, detachments, early contingents, more like proof of presence than mass. And we know the political context. Greenland is a self-governing territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, and the entire conversation is happening against a backdrop of renewed pressure and speculation over Greenland's future. But here's what we do not know yet. We do not know whether these flights are a one-off symbolic moment or the first step of a repeated pattern. We do not know whether Europe's role will stay limited to training and reconnaissance, or expand into a standing mission with regular airlift cycles, fixed infrastructure, and a permanent Allied footprint. We do not know how far NATO as an institution will formalize this, because there's a difference between NATO countries doing something and a NATO mission with NATO branding, command structure, and political weight. And most importantly, we do not know how Washington will interpret the message, because signals only work if the receiver understands them. And politics is a noisy channel. So before we go deeper, let's anchor the why Greenland matters to Europe, specifically to European security and to European psychology. Greenland is not just ice. Greenland is Danish territory inside the Kingdom of Denmark, which ties it politically and legally to Europe and to NATO. It is also a symbol. In a world where territorial pressure is coming back into fashion, Greenland represents a line. Sovereignty is not a menu item. Even if you believe nobody is about to seize anything tomorrow, Europe has a strong incentive to make one thing obvious. Greenland is defended in principle, not because it's likely to be attacked next week, but because if you leave a vacuum, you invite someone to test it. And Greenland matters strategically in a way that's easy to explain without jargon. The far north is becoming a corridor for sensors, for surveillance, for long-range planning, for routes that sometimes save time, sometimes save fuel, sometimes change military geometry. And it sits near a critical piece of U.S. posture, Patuxent Space Base, the American installation that supports missile warning and space-related missions. So Greenland is where 3 realities overlap: European sovereignty, NATO credibility, and the northern layer of early warning. That combination makes it the perfect place for signals, because any movement there instantly broadcasts to multiple audiences at once. Now we get to the mechanism, the part that makes this story more important than it looks. This is the oldest trick in alliance politics. You don't move troops only to fight, you move troops to shape choices, you move troops to remove ambiguity, you move troops to make certain options feel unavailable, and when you do it in small numbers, it's often more credible because it looks like insurance, not provocation. Think of it like this. A seatbelt is not a plan to crash, it's a plan to survive if something goes wrong. A small troop rotation in a sensitive territory is the seatbelt. It's Europe saying, we do not expect a crash, but we are not driving without restraints. And that's why the headline is not the aircraft. The headline is the sentence Europe is trying to say without a speech: you are not alone, and this is not available. Signal number 1 is political deterrence. Not deterrence in the Hollywood sense. Tanks rolling, missiles ready. Political deterrence. The deterrence of legitimacy, the deterrence of unity, the deterrence of making it socially and institutionally expensive to apply pressure. When European troops arrive in Greenland, Europe is doing two things at once. It is reassuring Denmark and Greenland. You're inside the club, you're not isolated, your sovereignty is not negotiable by surprise, and it is warning any would-be pressure campaign. You are not bargaining with one capital anymore. You are bargaining with a network. You are not negotiating in a quiet room. You are negotiating in a bright stadium. This matters because pressure strategies rely on isolation. They rely on making the target feel alone, uncertain, and afraid of escalation. The moment Europe makes the posture collective, pressure becomes harder. Not impossible. Harder. Because now any attempt to negotiate with pressure looks like bullying an entire alliance segment, not just a small country. And that changes the political cost curve overnight. Signal number 2 is preparing for the worst day without naming it. European leaders don't want to say out loud what the worst day is, because saying it can create it, but institutions plan for it anyway. The worst day could be an incident, a protest that turns into a legitimacy crisis, a diplomatic confrontation that spirals, a narrative war where misinformation and panic do more damage than any weapon, or a sudden policy move that forces Denmark and Greenland to react quickly. When you fly troops in, you are not just positioning bodies, you are positioning capability and attention. You're creating a channel for rapid coordination with local authorities. You're testing logistics, airfields, communications, medical support, movement in harsh conditions. You're building the muscle memory that you only need when everything gets ugly. And here's the mini cliffhanger. The scariest part of worst day planning is that it often signals what leaders privately think is plausible. Not inevitable. Plausible. They don't insure against fantasies. They insure against scenarios they believe have a non-zero chance of happening under stress. That is what this move tells you. Somebody in Europe believes uncertainty around Greenland has crossed from political noise into strategic risk. Signal number 3 is the internal rebalancing of NATO. This is the part most Americans miss because it feels abstract. NATO is not just America plus friends, NATO is a trust machine. And when the leader of a trust machine generates friction, even rhetorical friction, members start protecting themselves. They start building buffers. They start creating insurance inside the alliance. That can look like European nations coordinating more tightly with each other. It can look like more independent planning. It can look like small deployments that demonstrate unity without needing Washington's permission in the moment. And it can look like Europe quietly reminding everyone, Greenland's defense is a common concern, not a bilateral bargaining chip. This is not Europe turning against America in some dramatic sense. It is Europe doing what any rational actor does inside a relationship when uncertainty rises: reduce dependence, build optionality, create proof that you can act collectively. And once those structures exist, they don't disappear easily. Even if the political storm passes, the new habits remain. Now, before we go further, let's lock in the evidence block, because I don't want you to feel like we're floating. Multiple public reports describe these arrivals as small, rotational, and framed around reconnaissance, exercises, and reinforcement, while Denmark describes expanded presence tied to exercise activity and cooperation with allies, including roles like guarding critical infrastructure and receiving allied troops. These are not the words of a war mobilization. They are the words of posture. And high-level Danish language about a more durable allied presence tells you this is not just a one-week photo op. It is being positioned as a new normal, carefully, slowly, but deliberately. Now let's talk about why small numbers can be more powerful than big numbers. Big numbers can look offensive. Big numbers look like a plan to take something. Small numbers look like a claim. This is part of us. They function like a flag you can't ignore. And they raise the cost of any coercive move because coercion now has witnesses on the ground, politically and physically. There is a concept in deterrence theory that sounds cold but is easy to understand: a tripwire. A tripwire is not meant to win a war on its own. It's meant to ensure that if something happens, it becomes everybody's problem instantly. It prevents an aggressor from thinking, I can do this quickly before anyone reacts. When Europe puts people on the ground, it is building a tripwire of legitimacy. You can't treat Greenland as a private negotiation if Europe is physically present. The room is no longer empty. Now we do the historical pattern. 3 moments where troop presence was about signals, message, and insurance, not immediate war. And each ends with a punchline that mirrors today. First, West Berlin during the Cold War. West Berlin was a small island of Western presence inside Soviet-controlled territory. The Western garrison there was not large enough to defeat the Soviet Union. That was never the point. The point was that if Berlin was attacked, it would trigger a larger crisis immediately. The presence was a political statement embedded in military reality. Stage 1. Dominance. Post-war superpowers define zones. Stage 2. Overextension. Blockades and pressure test the borders of the new order. Stage 3. Smart response. Airlifts, alliances, symbolic presence that denies easy wins. Stage 4. Reset. Rules solidify because pressure fails to produce a cheap victory. The punchline that mirrors today: sometimes a small presence prevents a large catastrophe by making ambiguity impossible. Second, NATO's Baltic reassurance after 2014. When Russia seized Crimea, the fear in small NATO states was not just invasion, it was uncertainty. Would the alliance respond fast enough, or would a quick move create facts on the ground? NATO's response included enhanced forward presence, multinational battle groups, rotational forces, air policing, again, not because a few thousand troops could defeat a major power alone, but because they created unity on the ground. Stage 1. Dominance. Peace dividend assumptions after the Cold War. Stage 2. Overextension. Revisionism returns. Borders get tested. Stage 3. Smart response. Tripwire deployments and faster coordination. Stage 4. Reset. Defense spending rises, posture becomes more permanent, and the cost of aggression increases. The punchline that mirrors today: alliances spend money on presence when they fear political doubt more than military defeat. Third, the South China Sea and freedom of navigation signaling. Naval transits and small deployments there are often misunderstood as provocations, but at the strategic level, they are signals about norms. What counts as international space? What counts as coercion, and who accepts what? Stage 1, dominance. Global trade assumes open seas. Stage 2, overextension, claims expand, rules get contested. Stage 3, smart response, coalitions and repeated presence to deny new norms. Stage 4, reset, either a new stable norm emerges or the region becomes permanently militarized. The punchline that mirrors today: repeated presence is how powers defend rules when they don't want a war but refuse to surrender a precedent. Now snap that pattern onto Greenland today. Identify the current stage. We're in the ambiguity stage, where rhetoric, speculation, and political tension have created uncertainty around what is thinkable. Europe is responding not to tanks, but to doubt. And doubt spreads fast. That's why the signals matter. Here are 3 current signals that match the stage. Signal 1, Denmark framing Greenland's defense as a shared concern and inviting Allied presence, meaning Copenhagen is internationalizing the issue. Signal 2, Allied nations showing up in small numbers, tied to reconnaissance and rotational posture, meaning they are building the habit of presence. Signal 3, talk of more durable, even more permanent Allied involvement, meaning the posture is being normalized. The next domino is predictable. Once rotations become routine, infrastructure follows. You don't rotate smoothly without storage, communications upgrades, improved airfield handling, and clearer command relationships. And once infrastructure follows, the posture becomes harder to unwind. That's your cliffhanger. The real story may not be troops arriving today. The real story may be a slow Arctic build-out that quietly changes alliance geometry for years. Now let's handle skepticism before it spreads. Objection 1, this is just theater. No. Theater is when nothing changes after the cameras leave. Rotations and repeated logistics create capability. Capability changes calculations. Even small capability can matter if it changes legitimacy and speed of response. Objection 2, Europe can't defend Greenland anyway. That misses the point. This isn't about Europe winning a conventional war in Greenland. This is about making Greenland's status politically and institutionally non-negotiable under pressure, and about increasing the cost of coercion. Deterrence is often about cost, not about conquest. Objection 3, NATO would never fight the US, so this is meaningless. Again, wrong mechanism. The point is not to threaten America militarily. The point is to constrain political options, especially options that rely on ambiguity, speed, and isolation. The point is to turn a bilateral pressure campaign into a multilateral political crisis from day one. That is how you prevent quick wins. Objection 4, if this is about Russia and China, why talk about US politics? Because alliances don't operate in a vacuum. If internal friction rises, rivals benefit. Europe is trying to harden the alliance from the inside while also signaling outward. Now, what does this mean for the United States? 3 things, and none of them are good if you like cheap, smooth geopolitics. First, it means less room to negotiate with pressure. If Europe is physically and politically invested on the ground, any pressure tactic becomes more visible and more costly. Second, it means higher coordination costs. When more actors are involved, decisions take longer, messaging becomes more careful, and intelligence sharing gets more sensitive, especially if trust is under stress. Third, it increases the chance of misunderstandings. More forces operating in a harsh environment means more opportunities for incidents. Aviation miscommunications, patrol misreads, local political flashpoints, and narrative escalations online. Most incidents don't become crises, but in an environment of political tension, the probability that an incident becomes symbolic goes up, and symbolic incidents are the ones that force leaders into harder positions. This is where NATO internal balance matters. If European members believe the alliance leader is generating uncertainty, they don't abandon the alliance. They insure against it. They create European alignment inside NATO that can act faster, present a united front, and protect shared interests even when Washington is politically volatile. That rebalancing can be healthy in one sense. More burden sharing, more capability. But it also signals something uncomfortable. That unity is being maintained through insulation, not pure trust. And insulation is more expensive than trust. Trust is the cheapest form of power. Insulation costs money. Now the bridge to the household. How does this affect you as an American? Not in a dramatic war tomorrow way, in a cost curve way. First, defense spending and posture costs. Arctic operations are expensive, distance, weather, logistics, specialized equipment. If the Arctic becomes a more crowded theater, everybody spends more to feel the same level of safety. Second, markets and risk premia. When alliances look tense, investors price volatility. Volatility shows up in borrowing costs, in insurance costs, and in the cost of capital across the economy. Third, energy and logistics. Arctic signaling is connected to shipping routes, resource narratives, and the broader sense of global stability. Stability makes shipping cheaper. Instability makes shipping more expensive. That feeds into prices. Fourth, escalation risk by mistake. The most common way great powers stumble into crises is not desire. It's miscalculation under stress, when pride, politics, and incomplete information collide. If Greenland becomes a symbol in domestic politics on multiple sides, the room for quiet de-escalation shrinks. That's when mistakes get punished harder. Here's the mechanism again, stated simply, because it's the core of the whole story. Europe is not flying troops to Greenland to start a war. Europe is flying troops to Greenland to reduce uncertainty, to signal unity, protect legitimacy, and raise the political cost of pressure. That's what insurance looks like at the state level. Now, what should you watch? Because if you want to be calm, you watch indicators, not emotions. Watch 1. Recurrence. If you see repeated flights, repeated rotations, repeated joint exercises, and the same nations returning on a schedule, that's the transition from symbolic to structural. One-off moves are messages. Repeated moves are policy. Watch 2. Infrastructure announcements. The moment you hear about expanded Arctic infrastructure, airfield upgrades, communications nodes, storage, port improvements, dedicated support units, that's the moment the posture becomes durable. Rotations without infrastructure are fragile. Rotations with infrastructure become a habit. Watch 3. Mission language. If the language shifts from exercise and reconnaissance to air policing, critical infrastructure protection, or a named standing mission, the political weight rises. A standing mission means the alliance is formalizing the signal. Watch 4. Tone inside NATO and the EU. If the tone becomes more legalistic, more explicit about sovereignty, more direct about common concern, and more public about disagreements, that tells you trust is being managed, not assumed. When allies talk like lawyers, they are writing guardrails. Watch 5. Washington's internal break. Congress, funding decisions, official statements of commitment, and the posture of U.S. institutions matter more than any single leader's rhetoric. If the internal break is active through resolutions, funding constraints, and public reassurance, the scenario stabilizes. If the break weakens, volatility rises. And that leads to the tease for video 3 because it's the missing half of the story. While Europe is signaling outward, Washington is signaling inward. The question isn't only what Europe is doing on the ice. The question is whether the U.S. system is quietly tightening or loosening constraints. In the next video, I'll show you the internal American signals, the congressional pressure points, the funding levers, and the institutional language shifts that tell you whether this becomes a contained episode or a long-term rupture. So here's the landing. Restate the mechanism in one sentence. These troop flights are not a war move. They are a message, a signal, and an insurance policy against political uncertainty. Restate the stage and the key risk. We are in the ambiguity stage, where sovereignty narratives and alliance trust are being stress-tested, and the key risk is not immediate conflict, but miscalculation and slow-cost increases driven by volatility. One question for you. Keep it simple. Which worries you more, rotations becoming routine or infrastructure being announced? And if you think this is just theater, tell me what evidence would change your mind.